Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna. My name is Sitapati Das.
And my name is Danna Devi.
And this is Bhagavad-gita, the Song of God, as it is, by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Chapter 6, Sankhya Yoga.
Takes 20 to 23.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just going to go with the second edition now. We're not going to, the first edition. We won't bother comparing them again in the 6th chapter.
Yeah.
When we go to the 7th chapter, we'll have another look. But for the 6th chapter, I'm over it. Okay. Yatroparamate cittaṁ niruddhaṁ yoga-sevayā yatra caivātmanātmānaṁ paśyann ātmani tuṣyati sukham ātyantikaṁ yatad buddhi-grāhyam atīndriyam vetti yatra na caivāyaṁ sthitaś calati tattvataḥ yam labdhvā cāparaṁ lābhaṁ manyate nādhikaṁ tataḥ yasmin sthito na duḥkena gurunapi vachalyate tadvidyat duḥkha-saṁyoga viyogam yoga-saṁjñitam.
It's quite a long one.
Yeah, well, 3 verses, eh?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
Interesting, though, because it's like, this is 1, 2, yep. Then this is another verse. Then here's this other verse, right? And you can see it's got 1, and then 2, and then there's this, 3. Look, and even the numbers, look. See? 1, 2, 3.
So how number 3 is?
Because you notice here, there's this one extra. 1, 2, 3. It's a triplet instead of a double. See how these are couplets?
Mm-hmm.
Normally a Bhagavad-gita verse is a couplet, but 23 is a triplet.
I like triplets.
Okay, word for word. Yatra.
In that state of affairs,
yatroparamate.
when one feels transcendental happiness,
cittaṁ.
mental activities,
niruddhaṁ.
restrained from matter,
yoga-sevayā.
by performance of yoga,
yatra.
in that,
cha.
also,
eva.
certainly,
ātmana.
by the pure mind,
ātmanam.
self,
paśyann.
realizing the position,
ātmani.
in the self,
tuṣyati.
become satisfied,
sukham.
happiness,
ātyantikaṁ.
supreme,
yat.
in which,
tat.
that,
buddhi-grāhyam.
acceptable,
atīndriyam.
transcendental,
vetti.
knows,
yatra.
wherein,
na.
never,
cha.
also,
eva.
certainly,
ayam.
and this,
sthitaḥ.
situated,
calati.
moves
tattvataḥ.
from the truth, that
yam.
which,
labdhvā.
by attainment,
cha.
also,
āparaṁ.
by, any other,
lābhaṁ.
gain,
manyate.
that's not mine,
na.
never,
nādhikaṁ.
more than that,
tataḥ.
from that,
yasmin.
and which,
sthitaḥ.
being situated,
na.
never,
duḥkena.
by miseries,
gurunapi.
even though very difficult,
vichalyate.
become shaken,
tam.
that,
vidyat.
you must know,
duḥkha-saṁyoga.
miseries of material contact,
viyogam.
extermination,
yoga-saṁjñitam.
trance, and yoga.
Woo! We made it.
Yeah.
Translation. You want to read this?
Yeah, sure. Let me do that.
Do the whole thing because we've got a big purple to go.
Okay, the stage of perfection is called trance or samadhi, when one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness and enjoys himself through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks that there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact.
Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence without any of the misgivings of identifying the self with the superself. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of the Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the supersoul, and the monists think this to be liberation, but they do not understand the real purpose of the Patanjali system of yoga. There is an acceptance of transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualist, but in this verse, transcendental pleasure, realized through transcendental senses, is accepted. And this is corroborated by the Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutras, Purushartha Shunyanam Gunanam Pratipravasaha caivāyaṁ swarupa pratishtava chitti shaktiriti.
Oh. This Chitti
Chitti
Shakti or internal potency is transcendental. Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called caivāyaṁ by the monist. But according to Patanjali, this caivāyaṁ is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called cetodarpana marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation or Bhagavad-gita nirvapanam.
Bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam.
The theory of nirvana also preliminary corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam, this is called svarupena vyasvastiti. Yeah. The Bhagavad-gita also confirms this situation in this verse.
After nirvana, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service of the Lord, known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, swarupena vyavastiti, this is the real life of the living entity. Maya, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by his words, caivāyaṁ swarupa pratishta va chitti shaktiriti. This chitti shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutras as anandamayo abhyasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service or bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad-gita.
In the yoga system, as described in the chapter, there are two kinds of samadhi called samprajñata samadhi and asamprajñata samadhi. When one becomes situated in a transcendental position by various philosophical researchers, it is called samprajñata samadhi. In the asamprajñata samadhi, there is no longer any connection with mundane pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. A yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted by the siddhis, perfections, in the process of yoga are not perfectly situated, and the yogis are if the yogis are attracted by the byproducts of yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection, as it's stated in this verse. Persons therefore indulging in the make show practice of gymnastic feats or siddhis should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way.
The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. A Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing hatha yoga, dhyana yoga, and jnana yoga, but there is no such problem in executing karma yoga or bhakti yoga.
As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. But a person who is in pure bhakti yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bargain, and enjoys transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. He is callous towards incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But he is always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty. As stated in the Bhagavad-gita, agamapayino nityas tam titi sashva bharata. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga's practice.
Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. So this last part here. He is callous toward incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But he's always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga. So we had that so-called COVID-19 pandemic, which was, just the conspiracy theorists would say, the imposition of tyrannical government and then making a large step towards this execution of this plan that they're doing right now of demolishing the world order. But even if you say that it was a real legitimate disease, lol, callous towards incidental occurrences, whatever, big deal. Even the death of a most dear relative. I had Parambhava, my first wife, died in the middle of that. Those two things were going on at the same time. And then we had the Profest, the convoy in the Parliament occupation, which has been made into that movie. And, that was like that. It's like there was nothing significant about any of that made, people were like, oh, This is why, you know, just that time, place, and circumstance not to do Harinam there. It's like none of that stuff is anything. They're just incidental occurrences. That's all that stuff is. It doesn't change the fundamental thing at all. Chant Hare Krishna. What's the big deal? You know, like chanting Hare Krishna in the Santa parade is good. Chanting Hare Krishna in the protest is bad. It's nonsense. Anyway. This is one of the biggest verses in the Bhagavad-gita.
Looks like.
I remember back in the day trying to put this onto flyers, you know, because because we'd do teaching yoga in Wellington. When we opened that center there, it became just a yoga school basically. And then again in Brisbane, it was a period of time where it was popular and everything. And so in terms of like pitching to a crowd of people who were into yoga and wanted to come to yoga classes, this was the verse was my go-to. But I didn't but it was just too big, you know, and most people can't read this much. They want to see something, you know, like be the change you want to see in the world, you know, a slogan like that. They don't want a big thing like this. But that's because it's 3 verses, right? Bang together. And Srila Prabhupada basically uses this to say this is the actual goal of the Patanjali system of yoga, which has within it, you know, what people do today. Vyasaki had a great explanation of it when we were doing kirtan in Australia. The best one was we did a kirtan in a yoga studio, yoga school in Melbourne, and he explains it like this. He says, you know, that the yogis would go into the forest and they would sit in meditation on like a kusha grass mat and a deer skin. So you put down the kusha grass mat and deer skin on top, and the kusha grass repels insects. And then they would sit there on that and do meditation. And then in order to maintain their body, they'd take a break, you know, an hour or 2 hours a day or whatever. And then they would do these exercises to keep their bodies, the blood flowing and everything, and the mobility in that. And they developed a bunch of exercises that they could do without leaving their mat, without leaving their meditation place. They didn't have to go to the gym or anything. And they were also inspired by what they saw in the forest, the different animals. And so they got all those different poses, you know. And that was how he explained it. So basically the asana, you know, I don't know if they do it now that the Landmark Forum is online, but in the live in person one, they used to say, okay, let's take a stretch break, everybody stand up and stretch, you know, and then sit down again. And then it was like a, you know, a couple of seconds, 5-10 second stretch break, and then you sit back down again. And that's basically what yoga asanas are. Now when people talk about yoga, they think it's like calisthenic style mobility, you know, type physical exercises. They think that's yoga, and that it means going to like a yoga school or whatever. But that's like pretty much the antithesis of it. You know, like in here it says yogis here, a yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. But that kind of yoga, which is just doing yoga asanas, an exercise kind of thing, quite a feminine type exercise thing that attracts a lot of women because they're into like being flexible, and they go there and wear their, you know, like women go to the gym or whatever, and they, for some reason, I don't know, I do know why, but they wear like fully skin tight clothes. And then now there's a whole thing about women in gyms going like, oh, why you look at me? It's like, why you dress like that? If you don't, you know, you dress like that because you want people to look at you. If you don't want people to look at you, wear a burqa. Oh no, why can't I dress what I want and people don't look at me? It's like, hey, you can't have it both ways. You can either dress what you want, how you want, and, you know, you do what you want, and then I'm going to do what I want and look at you, and let's get real. That's why you dress like that. Or if you don't want people to look at you, don't dress like that. But you go into this environment when the original idea of yoga is you're going to go into the forest in a secluded place to practice yoga. Now you're going to and do meditation and then do a few exercises and stuff. Now it's about going into a gym or some kind of yoga studio and then being surrounded by women dressed like that, and then these people become like yoga teachers or yoga gurus like David Swenson, Bikram, those kind of people, and then they they have this big scandal about how they're like banging the yoga students / yoga teacher trainees, etc., etc. It's like, well, indulging in the make show practice of gymnastic feats, you should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. Yeah. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing hatha yoga, dhyana yoga, and jnana yoga, but there is no such problem in executing karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Of course, there are snares along the way, even in bhakti yoga, right?
Yeah.
Becoming like a big kind of devotee and, just pretense and stuff. It's just better to keep it real.
Yeah, I cannot stand that, just pretending.
The pretense? Yeah.
I'm pretending that I'm a very exalted devotee of Krishna. Oh, what is it supposed to mean? Yeah.
Some comments here from people watching. Hare Krishna, brother Rawadi Sears Natai. Kia ora whānau, Hari Bol, all the way from Albury in New South Wales, Australia. Shout outs. Hare Krishna, kia ora. And Ian Daniel, interesting reading that at the moment. I'm dealing with resignation, and today I noticed how easy it is to become thwarted. Yep. Thwarted. There's another purport that talks about that. Yeah, resignation. Resignation's definitely.
I think when you're not enjoying life, or when you don't have something that like really spark your intelligence, your spirit, you become kind of like a resignated, like kind of like
Resigned.
Resign. Like kind of heavy and sluggish, unmotivated, unenthusiastic about everything you do. Even exciting things is just not anymore exciting. Even the person that loves you or you love is just like, nah. Yeah, I guess it's I guess the thing that is connecting with Krishna, what is the most precious thing about life? Creating a possibility is one of the things. What do you really want to accomplish in life? And like, what kind of legacy you want to live in this life? Who you are in this life. Are you just going to be like one more person in the world, occupying the space and making the energy heavy? Or you want to be the best version of yourself and live a life that is fulfilled? Yeah. But it's easy to get into that world, though, of being like resigned and sluggish. Very, very easy.
Yeah. I mean, the powerful distinction for that in Landmark's curriculum, it's in the Self-Expression and Leadership program, and it's the distinction committed, not attached. And that's really a key lesson in Bhagavad-gita, is that one has to be committed and not attached. In this last part here, it says, as stated in the Bhagavad-gita, agama paino nityastam sthitaś vibharata. That's from the 2nd chapter, text number 14, I believe. 13 is dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir diras tatra namuyate. Matra sparshas tu kaunte ashitoshna sukha dukkada. Agama paino nityastam sthitaś vibharata. So 214 is matra sparshas tu kaunte ashitoshna sukha dukkada. The appearance and disappearance of happiness and distress are like the coming and the going of the summer and winter seasons. One must learn to tolerate them, O scion of Bharata. Tamstatikshashva Bharata. One must learn to tolerate them. Yeah. One must not be disturbed by them.
Yeah.
One has to learn tatikshva, to tolerance. And so in there, Srila Prabhupada explains that, in summer it's really hot, in winter it's really cold, but you got to do what you got to do, no matter what it's like. So it's a performance that you have the right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the results. That's in the second chapter as well. He says, Sve Sve Kamanyabirata. No. I can't remember the Sanskrit, but he says you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you're not entitled to the results. Never be attached to not doing your duty. And then one more point. Do you remember that? Do you know that verse?
No.
Okay, let's have a look at Bhagavad-gita as it is. Chapter 2. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty. So if I have a look for the word right. 247. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you're not entitled to the fruits. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results, and never be, ma karma pala heturbur mate sangostva karmani. So don't consider yourself to be the cause of the results, and never be attached to not doing your duty, akarmani. Karmanyeva dikaraste. You have the right to perform your prescribed duty, ma paleshu kadachana, but not to the fruits. Makarma pala heturbu. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities. And don't be attached to not doing your duty either. Like the points in here, so powerful. This is commitment, committed but not attached. 3 considerations here. So, when you get resigned when you become attached to the result. Oh, I did the thing, but I didn't get the result.
Right.
Somewhere in here, Srila Prabhupada, I can't remember, it's in a purport, he says that, when he can't get his result, he considers what is the point? He becomes demotivated.
Yeah, that can be, So that happens often.
Yeah.
When you don't get what you want,
Mm-hmm.
you just feel like, okay, like you said, what is the point?
Yeah, exactly.
I must as well do something that tickles my fancy or pleasure. And even though if you get like a whatever pleasure, it's temporarily.
Yeah, I mean, here in the Bhagavad-gita, it talks about your duty, right? Your prescribed duty. But it actually just says karmani, activities. So, you got to do your duty even though you don't want to and you don't get the results and everything. And it's kind of like, it sounds very onerous. You know that word, onerous?
Yeah.
In Spanish, what would that be?
Honorable.
No.
Onerous.
Yeah, like this.
Honorable. Honoroso?
Yeah.
Honoroso? Yeah, honoroso. Oneroso.
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 ¿Sí? ¿Se entiende?
Burdensome, heavy, serious, demanding. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oneroso. Pesado. Sí, pesado. Heavy. Difícil. Yeah. Pesado. Pesado. Obligaciones pesadas, ¿no? Yeah, onerous. Sounds that way. But it's like this idea of what you're committed to. What you're really committed to. And that's how you deal with upset or breakdowns, right? It's a breakdown against the possibility. So you go back to, what is it you go back to? What you're committed to. Then you create a possibility. So it's going back to what it is that you're committed to.
Yeah.
And then, what is it that you're committed to? Well, it depends on who you consider yourself to be, as to what, what is your commitment in the world. And that's fundamentally connected to who or what you consider yourself to be. Do you consider yourself to be thoughts, feelings, opinions, the genetics of the body? That's another thing I was thinking about the other day, related to the whole kind of, this talk about like, indigenous people,
Yeah.
It's funny to me how in the Landmark Forum, they get to the point of you're not your rackets, you're not your strong suits, you're not your thoughts, feelings, and opinions. Like none of those things are you.
Mm-hmm.
You are nothing. You are the space in which all of that shows up. You're the space in which life itself shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow they become deflected back to, and also you are the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in the genetics of the genes of the body, they actually went to the point of transcendence,
Mm-hmm.
You're not even the thoughts, feelings, and opinions and everything, but then they go back to you are the body. Like these people are this body, and it's like, I'm every bit as much this body as I am the land that the body was born in. Circumstantially, the time period, am I the 21st century? Or the 20th century? Am I the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s, the 2020s? Am I any of those things? No, I might have some experience of it. I might have an experience of a body made of certain genes and everything, genetics. But am I any of those things? Of course not. So to flip back to this bodily platform, bodily conception of life, how these people, who are like sitting here today are like, somehow I am, someone from 800 years ago. We're all the ancestors, reappearing, come back and living in the present moment with these different clothes and things on. But I'm not my clothes. And I'm, the body is every bit as much of clothes, here today, gone tomorrow. As a person puts on new clothes, giving up the old ones, similarly, the soul gets new material bodies, one after the other. Childhood to boyhood to youth to old age, and then into another one with a different set of genetics. And we are none of those things. So what you're committed to and what you're going to go back to depends on what you consider yourself to be. And it's very easy to identify with your thoughts, feelings, and opinions that are generated. It's like identifying with the weather conditions. Sometimes you feel happy, sometimes you feel sad, Sometimes you feel like you're winning and you're getting the results, that you're attached to and that you want, and sometimes not. And if you identify with those states, then that's going to generate your existence in a particular way. And if you identify with particular desires of the body or a particular aspect of it, then that'll generate you in a different way as well. But here it's talking about the highest state of consciousness called trance or samadhi, and your mind becomes completely restrained from material mental activities. So you transcend your strong suits, your rackets, and that's by practice of yoga. And the most potent practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness. So it's characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. So the thing here is it's a direct encounter with the self.
Correct.
It is the self encountering itself. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness and enjoys himself through transcendental senses. That's not the body, the mind, the thoughts, nothing. It's the actual self, the space of nothing. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So that space, I got it. When I did the Landmark Forum, I got this tattooed on my arm.
It looks like the shoe. Horseshoe.
Yeah, let me make sure I can get this into this here. It's called shunyata. And it is, people ask me, oh, what does that mean? And I say, nothing. And they're like, oh, I didn't mean to offend you or anything. Nobody's asked me that for years, but back when people did ask me, it really means nothing. Shunya, the void, empty and meaningless. An encounter, transformative encounter with nothing. But for the embodied souls, it's very difficult to sustain that nothing. You got to keep taking the something out, or distinguishing yourself from the thing, and that's the practice of yoga. So the distinctions and the work of landmark is a form of yoga.
Yeah, definitely, it's quite powerful.
Yeah,
it's really powerful. And then the more people will do it, the more they will understand themselves and have a better life, I guess. I'm going to say better, but transform life.
Yeah, the one thing that's missing from there is a transcendental something. You know, there's a transcendental nothing available through the work of landmark. But there's not a transcendental something available through it. And so eventually you end up putting something back in there, you know, like, and then you end up going back to the material platform and re-identifying with the body or the
senses.
Yeah, and that's just the nature of the embodied living entity. But this is a confidential truth that's available through bhakti yoga. It's a higher level, that there is a transcendental something. There's a transcendental something. You know, it seems as though, well, if the material world is something, then the transcendental world must be nothing. And the transcendental world is nothing material, but there is a transcendental something. Yeah. And it will be described further in the principle of how to connect with that and experience it is there.
Yes.
Okay. So
right.
Let's read it again. Yatroparamate cittaṁ niruddhaṁ yoga-sevayā yatra caivātmanātmānaṁ paśyann ātmani tuṣyati sukham ātyantikaṁ yattad buddhi-grāhyam atīndriyam vetti yatra na caivāyaṁ sthitaś calati tattvataḥ yam labdhvā cāparaṁ lābhaṁ manyate nādhikaṁ tataḥ yasmin sthito duḥkena gurunapi vichalyate tam vidya duḥkha-saṁyoga viyogam yoga-saṁjñitam.
The stage of perfection is called trance or samadhi, when one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. And that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness and enjoys himself through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks that there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of the greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact.
Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. Total world victory of Hare Krishna.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Ian Daniel says, isn't that what the advanced course is for? To create in that nothing. Yeah, it is. And the creation there is from what you're committed to. But you notice that not everyone goes on, you know, a lot of people, what has it not worked for people is they end up creating from the material platform in that space. And so that holds them back.
Yeah, they go back.
Throws them back. Yeah.
But here, what the most beautiful thing here is, pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. This is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self, and that joyous state. So basically, when you are being in that state, you feel joyous. And I can see that, when you chant,
Mhm.
you feel joyous. And when you create a possibility, you actually, when you are within that possibility, you feel joyous as well. That's my experience anyways, but
Yes.
people may have different experiences.
Yeah, if you look at it with people in the advanced course, right?
Mhm.
And then, then they go on to do the self-expression leadership program. And I coached on that for a number of years and trained as a self-expression leadership program leader, did apprenticeship and everything. I was around that program for maybe 3 years. What happens in there is people, they'll tend towards creating things and projects and that are, like, oh, how can I, make more money in my business or something like that. It's just like we call it like some kind of slightly expanded or extended selfishness, but it's a conception of the self, because it's a self-expression and leadership program, the self that they're expressing in there. And this is why I say that what you're committed to is a function of who you consider yourself to be, like where your identity is currently located, what you're identifying with. Like at the lowest level, you get angry and you identify with your anger, and I am angry. Not even I'm experiencing being angry, but I am angry. Like you literally identify with that, and then it gives you your being. So they identify with some aspect of their existence, and it gives them their being. Some desire that is imposed upon them by the conditioned nature of their existence, and that's what's called conditioned living, conditioned nature.
Even like when people say, "I am angry with you," I am, like they're
yeah, they identify with it
rather than like I am experiencing anger.
Yeah. So then there's like
language.
Yeah, so that's at the lowest level, and that's like the most transient thing. But all these transient aspects of identity, like, no 3-year-old child wants to make $1 million. But at some point in your, development of your brain and what you're experiencing, like I'm now experiencing being 20 years old, or I'm experiencing being 30 years old. Maybe I'm experiencing being a 30-year-old woman who's not married, and I'm worried about like or I've been divorced and I have these children. I'm worried about how I'm going to sustain myself. And so I want to have a business that makes money, et cetera, et cetera. So then you invent a self-expression and leadership program project that's driven by identification with that. And that's what you want to fulfill on, because you identify yourself with that. So you're creating a something in the space, but it's a something driven by the transient conditions of your experience, the material nature, the material conditioning of your experience, whether it's fleeting emotions, stage of life, even like identifying with the genetics of the body. I want to create one for people who identify themselves with the bodies that have genes, that we have a story that we call them the Maori people, or whatever it might be, right? And so there's like just these kind of various expanding ones. And then the most expansive one you can have is basically to become a forum leader, which is like more nothing. So you're falling forward into nothing over and over again. And then you have to deal with, but what about me? What about who's going to take care of my desires, and who's going to fulfill, I feel hungry. How am I going to eat if I don't focus on getting something to eat, right? Or I'm a 30-something-year-old woman and I need to worry about my retirement. And then it's like, how does like creating nothing or giving the experience of nothing to other people, how does that fulfill on that? And that's what people struggle with, because that path forward is a path falling forward into nothing. And if you examine it, if you go and look, you'll hear people like Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount speaking to that. He's saying to his disciples there, he says, do not worry what you will eat or wear. Do not the birds do no work? They sow no seeds and they eat. The plants don't, make any clothes or anything, the trees, but they're all fully clothed. So God is taking care of all of their necessities. And how much more dear to God are you than they are? He will take care of you. So he's speaking to them in that way. It's like Mrigari the hunter as well, you know? He said, well, if I stop hunting these animals and killing them, how am I going to survive? And Narada Muni said, you don't have to worry about that. You simply chant God's holy name and everything will be taken care of. So there's this falling forward into material nothingness, like abandoning your attachment to your identity itself and everything that's driven by that. And that is very difficult for people to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the advanced course, although people do get to create something in that nothing, oftentimes what they're doing is they're just creating another version of their material self. And if you have a look at the expansion of the identity, the levels of identity that gets covered at the beginning of the self-expression leadership program, they have like, you know, and this is also discovered and discussed in the Taittiriya Upanishad, which is why when I did the self-expression leadership program, I recognize this. It's in the advanced course, actually. You know, there's like individual self, family, community, society, right? Global, and then like out to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the different levels of the expanded consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But Srila Prabhupada refers to them in the purports as extended selfishness, extended self-interest, further, but they are levels of advancement where you identify yourself progressively with more and more until you actually identify yourself as part and parcel of Krishna, who is, you know, Lord Vishnu, who is the source of all living entities and who is all pervading.
Mm-hmm.
And when you identify yourself with that, not in the sense of like, I am everything, but in the sense of I am the servant of Lord Vishnu, who is everything. And in that way, you become simultaneously identified with everything,
mm-hmm.
but also still located within it as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you an orientation that you can actually work with, where you have like something, you know, the individual identity and everything, nothing as well, in relationship with each other. So until you get to that point, which basically would turn landmark into a religion at that point, if they pointed people to that. But yeah, I mean, the distinctions of landmark and the work of landmark without that conception, it's incomplete and it leads people back to a material identification, which is why they fell into the whole thing that happened with COVID and like into identity politics and all that kind of stuff. And they get diverted back into that because even though they take people to the point of you are nothing and word, somehow organizationally at some level after that, it's kind of like you get involved in like, you know, if you have a look at it, people are like into this intense bodily identification. It's a story. There's no reality to any person who is alive right now, even being their own thoughts and feelings right now. What to speak of somehow, you know, identifying with a body and then thousands of years in the past and all this kind of stuff. That's all just a story. And you know, you can work with those stories and you can create them, but there's just no reality to any of that. Yeah.
It's crazy when you start thinking from that point, like, what? Nothing's a reality. It's everything. Well, like Bhagavad-gita, right? Krishna says everything is an illusion.
Does he say
this
that?
material world's an illusion. It's a reflection of the spiritual world.
Yeah.
It's like the mirage, which is an illusion. It's not like actually the actual thing.
That's the 15th chapter, the Purushottama Yoga, the yoga of the Supreme Person. Yeah, this world is, there is a banyan tree. There is a tree whose roots go up and whose branches go down. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that's a reflection. That's when you see a tree that goes like that. Yeah, and it is reflected on desire. Well, you know, the world is real but temporary, and the bodies are real, the thoughts and the feelings are real, but the identification with them is the illusion. And you can start to break that through language, which is, you know, what you get in the Landmark Forum. That's your access. Rather than I am angry, I am experiencing being angry, or I'm experiencing anger. And in that way, you can have anger rather than anger having you, giving you your being. So you can be being angry rather than angry being you. And that is rather than anger being you, because that's what's happening. When someone's like, I am angry, what's happening is anger is being you. And then if it's like, well, if I'm none of those things, then what am I? And at that point
Scary moment.
Yeah, well, once you get that, there's like, you're in the space of nothing, but you can't stay there. You can't stay there because something rushes in. And if it's not a transcendental something, it's going to be all these other kinds of conditional things. And so that's where people come unstuck. And that's why Landmark's ability to like fully transform the world and transform, people is like stunted. And that's why a number of us, have like stopped participating during COVID.
Correct.
Okay, and it's extremely valuable, and you guys are doing the seminar at the moment.
I know.
It's great. Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Sri Krishna. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the questions, Ian, and the shout out, Rawiri. Hare Krishna.
Haribol.